And why did Trump reject his own administration's findings on climate change?
Each week, The Score from Bearing Drift brings listeners news, reviews, and interviews.
To learn more, visit bearingdrift.com.
Hello and welcome to The Square Circle. I'm your host, Adam Bearne. Joining us today are Stephenie Foster of Smash Strategies, conservative commentator Valerie Greenfeld, and Rachel Tripp of Young Voices. Welcome, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Late tonight, President Trump has dismissed a report from his own administration on climate change. Here's the footage from The Guardian.
I've seen it, I've read some of it, and it's fine.
They say economic impact is devastating.
Yeah, I don't believe it.
You don't believe it?
No, I don't believe it. And here's the other thing. You're going to have China and Japan and all of Asia and all of these other countries, addresses our country. Right now, we're at the cleanest we've ever been, and that's very important to me. But if we're clean, but every other place on earth is dirty, that's not so good. So I want clean air, I want clean water, very important.
Okay, so Stephenie Foster, what do you make of President Trump's assessment of the report?
Well, I would say this. There were 1,000 people who worked on this 13-agency, interagency report, and they came to this conclusion. It's, one in a series of reports that have come out over the last several years, but particularly this year, really setting forward the dire nature of where we are in terms of climate change. So I would say everyone can make their own decision, but I go with the experts and the people who've studied this. I think one thing we need to remember about climate change is that it's really a national security issue and a global security issue. As climate gets worse, there are more droughts, more floods, food insecurity creates wars massively. That's, a lot of wars occur because of those natural disasters and food insecurity. Here at home, we know that there'll be decreased crop production. Industries like dairy and soybeans and oyster farming and all that are really going to lose large parts of their income. So this is a serious issue, and there are things that can be done. Obviously, every country needs to play its part. That's why the Paris Agreement was a big thing, the Paris Agreement for climate change, which we have pulled out of those voluntary sort of standards. So I do agree with President Trump that every country needs to play its part, but we do too. And I think this is a seminal moment, and all of the reports that have come out say that this is kind of the time we have before things get so bad that our world is basically careening off into instability, essentially, and insecurity.
And Valerie Greenfeld, this report says that this is already making life harder for Americans with stronger and larger hurricanes and worse wildfires. Do you believe the scientists with this report?
I can't doubt them. I'm not a scientist, but I can say that I think there are a lot of other things that impact our environment. For example, the fires in California recently, it's horrendous. So many people were killed and lost their homes, and it's a terrible thing. But coming from Colorado, as I do, my parents have a ranch in the mountains, and my father would always tell me that you have to cut trees down in between so that the brush doesn't make the fires continue. And if you don't thin the forests, then their odds of having a fire are greater. And so the environmentalists that do not agree with cutting down trees, those laws in California are steady, so they cannot thin the trees, and that creates bigger possibility of fires.
So the fire officials there say that it's years of drought that has led the trees and the undergrowth to become much more dry, and that's why these fires are so explosive. It's not to do with forest management.
I agree that that's a part of it, and it's also similar in Colorado because we have such a dry climate there. But there are ways that we can prevent the fires beforehand. And what happened here, once it's done, it's out of control. The wind is blowing. There's nothing can be done. So I'm not disagreeing with the report itself, but I think that there are things that can be done to help the environment and help keeping some of the things that you mentioned from happening that we should be doing.
Yeah, maybe we should get away from forest fires specifically because there's been a lot of debate about that recently. But Rachel Tripp, where do you stand on this larger issue of climate change and the President's approach to it?
Sure. Well, I think that this report was one that was obviously based on something that I hope that many people by now can agree to be true, that climate change is real, that it's happening. I think the bigger debate is it man-made or are there other factors at play? And I think that the biggest...
It's not a large debate though, is it?
I think it is. I think it's a pretty legitimate debate around what percentage of what we've seen in terms of climate change is man-made and what part of it is a natural process that occurs over time. And what we do have to do is consider what actions can we take as a global community and as the United States to make sure that we do prevent this from having an impact on our day-to-day lives, from having an impact on our climate moving forward, but also in a way that doesn't necessarily overregulate or harm industries or harm our economy.
Do you accept that the overwhelming majority of scientists say that this is a man-made phenomenon?
I understand that there's a lot of evidence on both sides, and I think that what we can do going forward from both arguments is say, what can we do that will keep our economy healthy and our planet healthy?
Okay, I would disagree with the sentiment. There's a lot of evidence on both sides. Where do you stand there?
I disagree with that also, but I think one thing that we need to debunk is that obviously there's an economic impact of climate change in terms of what it's going to impact farmers, et cetera, but there are a lot of jobs that can be created in terms of, jobs that can address sort of the climate change issues, try to really address some of the technology to capture wind and solar. And so I think we need to be looking also is that this is a tremendous time for technological innovation, and it can actually create jobs. Different kind of jobs that aren't as dangerous, jobs that really help us go to the next level, whether it's, I read an article about people sort of farming in the ocean in terms of new food sources and, of course, capturing other energy sources. So I think we need to really look at this in terms of its impact on the economy in a negative way, but also the possibilities of green jobs and jobs that can really help us both give people livelihood but address the crisis.
Okay, so we can address the crisis and create jobs and boost the economy.
And who could argue with that?
Rachel Tripp, would you argue with that?
So for me, I agree. I think that there's a lot to be said for wind and solar. I think it's important that we investigate all avenues for making lives better for people, for giving people more access to power and to energy and fuels and jobs. But that being said, I think that we shouldn't replace one with the other. I think just because we want to investigate new ways to create energy cleanly doesn't mean that we should necessarily disband or heavily regulate the methods that we're already using.
Okay, thank you very much. That is all for this week. I'm Adam Bearne. Thank you for watching The Square Circle. We'll see you next week.